Hi everyone and welcome. In this video we are going to be implementing role-based access control to manage some Active Directory objects and some of our servers. So what's role-based access control all about? First of all, every user in Active Directory is going to have one or more roles. And what we do is we create a group, a security group for each one of those roles, and then we add the users into whichever groups represent the roles that they have in the organization. We'll get to the access control in a little bit. I'm logged on to my domain controller with the administrator account, and I'm going to open Active Directory users and computers. And what we're going to do in here is start creating some additional organizational units. Now, our organization has two sites, one in Waterloo, one in Calgary. So we're going to start off by creating an organizational unit for each site underneath the domain. If I expand the domain out, we can see that we have a few containers. If I right-click and say I want a new organizational unit, there's Waterloo, and I'll do the same thing for Calgary. Right. Now, why would we do this? We might have different admins in IT that are responsible for these different sites. So by creating these organizational units, we can delegate the administrative rights to the different users. And we'll look at that in just a bit. Now, one of the other things we very often do is we'll divide up our sites into the types of objects that we administer. In our case, we're going to have three. We're going to have users, servers, and endpoints. So I'm going to pick Waterloo. I'm going to right-click in the right side over here and say I want a new org unit. There's users. And I'm going to do something here that's a mistake so I can show you how to fix something like this. Right now, users is the current object, which means whatever I do over here is going to be based on users. Having just created that org unit, it's pretty easy to think, oh, that's Waterloo, and you don't really notice. So if I right-click here and say I want a new org unit called servers, I can create that very easily, and oops, look at that. Servers is inside users, not inside Waterloo. So this should be pretty easy to fix, right? I should be able to right-click on this and say I want to move that up to Waterloo. That's all good, and say OK. And we get an access is denied message. The reason we get that is to move servers from users to Waterloo, we kind of have to delete out of users. And by default, what happens when we create those objects is that there is an option selected that will prevent accidental deletion. So what we need to do is turn off the prevention of accidental deletion, move it, and then turn it back on again. So let me show you how we do that. We go into View and then pick Advanced Features, and you'll see a number of additional containers that we're not going to worry about for now. But if I expand out Waterloo and I expand out users, here is servers. I'm going to right-click on that, and if I go into Properties and pick Object, here is Protect Object from Accidental Deletion. So I'm going to deselect that and say OK. Now, if I try to move this up to Waterloo, that works just fine. So we see servers now under Waterloo, and then I'm going to go back into the Properties, Object, re-enable that protection so that we don't accidentally delete the organizational unit somewhere down the road, and at the same time delete 1,000 user accounts. And the last thing I have to do for Waterloo is create an org unit called endpoints. So here are my three org units for Waterloo. Going to have to do the same thing for Calgary. So right-click on Calgary, new org unit. Okay, and now I've got my organizational units done for Calgary as well. So we've kept pretty much the same type of a structure organizational unit-wise between our different sites, and that's a very common thing that you'll see done. All right, so let's start looking at getting some rights set up for users. I'm going to have a user named John Jones that is part of the IT staff and is at our Waterloo site. First thing I'm going to do is create that standard user for John Jones. This will be the user account that he logs on with to do all of his normal everyday stuff, his email, all the rest of that kind of good thing. And then we'll create that second administrative account for when he has to do administrative things. So create a new user. Pretty easy thing to do. We'll put in the information for John. So here we've got John's information, his name, his login, and we'll put in his password. And like we did before, we'll set it so he doesn't have to change his password at next login and not expire the password. Again, this is not something you're going to do in production, but this way we won't have expiring passwords throughout our semester. Say next and finish. So John's account is now created. And what we're going to do is create that second administrative account for John, which is going to be in the IT container. So again, right click, we'll say new user. We'll put in John's information. And in this case, for him to authenticate, he's going to do jjones-a for the administrative side of things, and he will only use this account when he's doing administrative work. Let's get next. We'll do the password. No change, and doesn't expire. And finish. Okay, so John's got his account. Right now, though, he doesn't have any special rights. It's just an account. So we mentioned before that we have roles, and for every role, we're going to have a group. I'm going to create a new group for a role. So new group. Service Desk Admins Junior. That's a role within our organization. We're also going to have intermediate and senior, so I'll set those groups up too. Okay, we've got our groups created. So junior, intermediate, and senior. Those are the roles. John is going to be a senior admin. So all I need to do is right-click on John, add him to a group, and here is everything that starts with SER, which is what I typed in, and I'm going to pick Service Desk Admin Senior. So John's now been added to that group. If I look at John's account and look at what he's a member of, he is a member of Domain Users, which is automatic, and he's a member of Service Desk Admin Senior, which I just set up now. And if I look at Service Desk Admin Senior and look at the members, here's John. So that part's set up. Still can't do anything though. Here we get into the access control part. So I've got my roles, and what we also do then is we create groups that are going to be used for the access part. So we're going to assign access rights, access permissions to those access groups, and we're going to make the appropriate role groups members of those access groups. So the access groups get assigned the rights and permissions. Because of the membership of the role group is going to acquire those rights, and because the users are in the role group, the users are going to acquire those rights as well. So let me set up a few accounts here, group accounts that is. So the first one we're going to do is create a new group, and this is going to be local admins for servers. So local admins servers. This is also going to be a global group, and the reason for the global group is because we're going to nest groups within groups, and that is by far the easiest thing that we can do for that. So here is one of those access groups, and I'm going to do 3 more. Okay, so I created local admins servers, printers, and endpoint. And then I also have domain admins users. Why local? These are going to be assigned to local servers or endpoints, workstations, or they're going to be able to administer users at the domain level. So now I've got these guys set up. I don't have that relationship yet. If I look in servers, for example, then this has no members. So what we're going to do is start off with junior. Our junior admins are going to be able to administer endpoints, and they're going to be able to administer users at the domain level. So I'll right-click this guy, say that I want to add him to a group. I'm going to say local, and this will be endpoint. And then I'm also going to add this guy into another group, which is domain admins users. So if I now look at junior admins, bring up the properties, and I look at what this is a member of, then I see that this is a member of domain admins users and local admins in endpoint. So these are the access groups that this role is a member of. Therefore, this role group is going to acquire whatever rights and permissions we assign here. And I'm going to do the same thing for intermediate. Now, intermediate is going to be the same as junior, but we're going to gain printers. So if I add this to a group, I'll do my domain admins users, and then I'll also add this to groups that start with local, and I'll pick endpoint and printers and say OK. If I look at my intermediate properties, member of, domain admins users, local admins endpoint, local admins printers. And then the last thing we'll do is senior. This is going to be a member of all of them. So domain admins users, and then also we'll add this into all three of those local groups. And as you can see, junior going to intermediate, intermediate gets more, and then we go to senior, senior gets more. So that's basically how we build up the rights. Now we still haven't done anything yet. These groups that we created for access don't have any access. So let's start putting something like that together. And we're going to start with domain admins users. What we're going to do is allow anybody who can get rights through this group to be able to create and manage users and create and manage groups on the users OU in Waterloo and the users OU in Calgary. So in other words, what will end up happening is those folks are going to be able to administer users at all of our different sites. Let's start off with Waterloo. The way we do this, I'm going to right click on users and I'm going to say I want to delegate control. Starts the delegate control wizard. I have to specify who is going to get these rights. So I'm going to add in that domain admins users, that guy right there. And then I have to specify what am I going to allow them to do. Now I can get into some really complex different sets of rights and that type of a thing, but the common tasks are going to work for us very well. Create, delete, and manage user accounts. I'll pick that one. Create, delete, and manage group accounts. I'll click that one. I'll say next and finish. And now this group has rights to create and manage users and create and manage groups on that org unit. I'll do the same thing up in Calgary. Right click on users, delegate control, add in my domain admins users, this guy here. Next, that, and that. Next, finish. That's all I have to do. John, because he is a member of a role group that is a member of this access group, now can administer users in either one of these sites. Nice. So that's with objects in Active Directory. Now, one of the other things that we'd like to do as well is allow these users to administer certain things on the member servers that are going to be part of our Active Directory domain. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to switch over to my server 3. So here I am on server 3, and I'm going to go into the computer management utility on this particular machine, and I'm going to make some changes to the local users and groups. And I'm logged on to this server with an administrative account. If I look in groups, we have this thing called administrators. And if I look at this administrators group, right now the members are domain admins. That's automatic when you join the domain, and administrator. But what if I want those local admins servers members to be able to administer my server that's a member? All I have to do is say add. This is going to look in the domain to find the object. So I'm going to say local, And out of this, I want my servers admins. I'll pick that. And we can see that group is now added in here, which means anybody who is in this group or a member of a group that is in this group is going to be able to administer this entire server, everything to do with the server. Done deal. Now, there might be some things we want people to do on this server but not have full server admin rights. For example, I want somebody to administer printers. There's a built-in group, thank you Microsoft, for creating this group that has all the rights necessary to administer printers on the server. If I open this, there are no members. So what I can do is, again, I'll add, say local. This is going to point at the domain. And I can see all of these local admins, and here's one for printers. So if I select that and add this in, that means now that anybody who is in that local admins printers group or a member of a group that's a member of this group will be able to administer printers, but only the printer functionality on this particular server. Done. Okay, one other thing we're going to do while we're in here, because we're using remote desktop, is I'm going to make it so that all of our users can connect into this server via remote desktop. If you're connecting with a console, you don't need to do that, but we're not going to be using a console because that's not common practice. So I'm also going to open remote desktop, and I'm going to add in here just straight up domain users, this group. Every user we have in the domain is a member of that group. And we'll say OK for that. Very common approach to administering our servers. Now, we need to go back over on the server one and do one more thing on the domain controller. Okay, I'm back on the domain controller. What I want is my server admins to be able to administer the server functions of the domain controller. Not the domain functions, just the server functions. If I look in this thing called built-in, there are a whole bunch of groups. There's more, but very similar to what we saw in the member server. And we have this thing which is going to be server operators. So I'm going to open this, look at members. Again, there aren't any. So I'm going to add in that local server admins, this guy right here, meaning that my senior admin team is going to be able to manage this server, but not the domain part, just the local server part. And again, that's a very common thing to do. One of the reasons we built those access groups as global groups is so that I could actually add that here, because you can't add a local group to a local group. Now, along with the group membership, there's one other thing we have to do to allow our server admins to deal with our domain controllers, and that is we have to allow them to log in through remote desktop. That requires something called a group policy, which we're going to deal with in more detail later on in the course. But for now, I'll just show you how to set that up. I'm going to go into Tools and launch something called Group Policy Management. I'm going to pick my domain and right-click and create a group policy in the domain. And we're going to call this Allow Server Admins Remote. We'll say OK. And now we have an additional policy object here. So I'm going to right-click this and edit. And the way I'm going to do this is on computer configuration. I'm going to expand policies. I'm going to expand Windows settings. And we'll make this a bit bigger so that we can see it. We're going to expand security settings. And we're going to look at local policies and user rights assignment. And as we'll see once we get in here, there's this thing called Allow Login through Remote Desktop Services. I'm going to double click that. We're going to enable the policy, and what we're going to do is add in that, oops, sorry, we have to spell that out completely. As we browse, so I can say local admins servers. So by saying OK, this means that from a policy perspective, anybody who is in this group is going to be able to do a remote desktop connection. So I'm going to OK that, and that's basically all we have to do. I'm going to close out of here. And now we're basically set up so that our server admins team, our senior team, is going to be able to remotely connect into our domain controller. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. From my server 3, I'm going to log out as my admin user. And I'm going to open a remote desktop session as John Jones. Not the John Jones admin account. And John logs in fine, no problem. Now, can John do anything administratively? Let's see if John can create a user account on the server. Open this up. We'll go into computer management. Same as what we did before. Here are my local users and groups. If I say I want to create a new user, try to create that, and we can't because access is denied. Makes sense, right? Because John Jones is a standard user. Really good point about using your standard user account unless you need to do administrative things. Now, what about the John Jones administrative account? So if I get out of here and log out as John Jones standard user, and now open a remote desktop session to John Jones admin, okay, so John's in, no problem. We even see server manager starting. I'm going to open our computer management again. And if I go in to users and I want to create a user just to see if I can, no problem. Here's my new user. So because John Jones admin account is a member of that senior service desk role group, which is a member of the local admins servers group, which is a member of the administrators group here, that gives John his admin rights on the server. Okay, let's try something else out. I'm going to switch back over onto server 1. So here I'm logged on with my admin account. What I'm going to do is log off, and let's see if we can get John to log on using his admin account. Okay, now first thing, tried to sign on with John's non-admin account. This is rejected. By default, only admin users can even log on to a domain controller. Standard users cannot. So standard users by default can log on to any domain computer, but not administrators. Okay, so what happens now if we try to log in with the John Jones admin account? So open my remote desktop session. And John's admin account is able to successfully log in. Awesome. Which means that John can now get into our domain controller to administer that. And while we're in here, let's take a look at a couple of other things because John should be able to do some account management. So I'm going to open Active Directory users and computers. And when we get in here, Let's see if John can create an IT user. So if I select the IT container, we'll say that John wants to, oh, look at that. There's no new in there because John doesn't have any permissions. But we said before that John should be able to create users in our site containers. So if I select users and say that we want to create a new user and group, but only user and group. Remember when we were logged on with the domain level administrator, there was a lot more stuff in here. Right? We could create organizational units and that type of a thing, but John does not have the capability to do that. He can't create the user though. Same thing if I look up in Calgary. On users, he can create new users and groups. But if he goes into servers as an example, again, no new because he doesn't have any rights to do anything there. And that is a wrap for looking at the basics of role-based access control. That's a wrap for the video. Hopefully this has been helpful for you, and we'll see you next time.